The crack of a gunshot echoed through Silvercreek, Colorado, in the summer of 1875, followed by the tinkling of shattering glass as a champagne bottle exploded midair. A cheer rose from the gathered crowd as Jane Jameson stood on the grand balcony of her newly constructed mansion, smiling graciously while another suitor attempted to impress her with his marksmanship. "Another fine shot, Mr. Thornton," Jane called down, her voice carrying across the expansive grounds. At 26, the copper-haired heiress to the Jameson mining fortune was the most sought-after woman in 3 territories. Men traveled hundreds of miles just for the chance to court her, their saddlebags heavy with gold nuggets and promises of riches. Jane's father, the late Ezekiel Jameson, had struck the richest silver vein in Colorado history 5 years prior. When typhoid took him the previous winter, Jane found herself the sole inheritor of a fortune that made even the Denver banking houses seem modest. The mansion she'd built overlooking Silvercreek stood as a testament to her wealth, 3 stories of imported stone and lumber that seemed wildly out of place in the otherwise rustic mining town. Below, Reginald Thornton holstered his pistol and bowed deeply, the sun glinting off the gold watch chain that draped ostentatiously across his brocade vest. "Perhaps you'd allow me the pleasure of escorting you to the Founders' Day celebration next week, Miss Jameson." Before Jane could answer, another suitor stepped forward. "Miss Jameson has already promised that honor to me," declared Harold Pennington, the owner of 3 successful saloons in town. He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small leather pouch, tossing it up to the balcony where it landed with a heavy thud at Jane's feet. "A small token of my affection, gold dust from my new claim on Thunder Mountain." Jane's lady's maid, Beatrice, hurried to pick up the pouch, adding it to a growing collection on a side table already laden with gifts from admirers' gold nuggets, silver brooches, and even a small leather sack of uncut diamonds from a gentleman who owned interests in South Africa. "Gentlemen, please," Jane called down, her smile fixed but her eyes betraying fatigue. "I've made no promises to anyone regarding the Founders' Day celebration. I shall consider all invitations equally." From her vantage point, Jane could see at least 15 men congregated on her lawn, all wearing their finest attire despite the summer heat, all hoping to win her hand through displays of wealth. Some had been camped at the Silver Palace Hotel for weeks, sending daily gifts and proposing business partnerships that would merge their fortunes with hers. Not one had thought to ask what she might actually want. "That'll be all for today, gentlemen," called Beatrice, stepping forward beside her mistress. At 35, the no-nonsense widow had appointed herself Jane's protector as much as her maid. "Miss Jameson has correspondence to attend to." As the crowd of suitors reluctantly dispersed, Jane leaned against the balcony railing with a sigh. "What am I to do, Beatrice? They see nothing but dollar signs when they look at me." "That's the burden of wealth, miss," Beatrice said pragmatically. "But you needn't marry any of them if you don't wish to." Jane turned to go inside. "Father always said I should marry for advantage, to strengthen the business." "Your father isn't here anymore," Beatrice reminded her gently, "and you've more than enough advantage on your own." Inside the mansion's ornate study, Jane settled at her writing desk to review the mining company's accounts. The room felt stifling despite the tall windows open to catch the summer breeze. After an hour of ledger entries, she pushed back from the desk and stood. "I'm going riding," she announced to Beatrice, who was arranging flowers. "And I don't want an escort. But Miss Jane, no arguments. I need air and solitude, not another man tracking my every move." Jane was already changing into her riding habit, a practical dark green skirt split for riding astride. "I'll take Mercury and be back before supper." 30 minutes later, Jane galloped along the pine-covered ridge above town, her chestnut gelding eager for the exercise. She'd slipped out through the kitchen garden to avoid being seen, taking a narrow trail through the aspens that few knew about. The mountains rose around her, beautiful and indifferent to human concerns about wealth and status. Cresting a hill, Jane reined Mercury to a stop. Below stretched the valley with Silvercreek nestled within it, smoke rising from cook fires and smelters. Beyond the town proper lay the sprawling Jameson mine works, where hundreds of men toiled day and night extracting silver from the mountain's depths. The sound of a branch snapping made Jane turn sharply. 20 feet away, a man stood beside a dappled gray horse, looking as startled to see her as she was to see him. "Beg pardon, madam," he said, touching the brim of his well-worn cowboy hat. "Didn't mean to startle you." Jane's hand moved to the small derringer she kept in her pocket. "What are you doing up here?" He gestured toward a patch of vibrant wildflowers growing in a sunny clearing. "Just picking these." Indeed, he held a small bouquet of blue columbines and orange paintbrush flowers in his weather-roughened hand. Jane noticed he wasn't dressed like her usual suitors, no fancy coat or shiny boots, just practical denim trousers, a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and a leather vest that had seen better days. His face was tanned from outdoor work, with laugh lines around eyes the color of the Colorado sky. "Those are lovely," Jane said, relaxing slightly. "For your sweetheart," a smile crinkled the corners of his eyes. "For my mother's grave, actually, it's her birthday today." Jane felt a flush of embarrassment. "I'm sorry, that was presumptuous of me. No harm done." He gathered the reins of his gray. "I'd best be on my way. These need water if they're going to last until I reach town." "You're headed to the cemetery in Silvercreek," he nodded. "My ma's buried there. She passed 2 winters ago." "I'm riding that direction myself," Jane found herself saying, though she hadn't been planning to go into town. "Perhaps we could ride together." The cowboy seemed to hesitate before nodding. "I'd welcome the company, miss." "Jane," she said, deliberately omitting her surname. "And you are Wade Kincaid," he replied, swinging up into his saddle. "Most folks just call me Wade." As they rode side by side down the mountainside, Jane studied her companion from the corner of her eye. He sat his horse with the easy grace of someone who'd spent most of his life in the saddle. Unlike the posturing men who visited her home, there was something genuine about the way he moved and spoke. "You're not from around here, are you, Wade?" she asked. "Just passing through, actually." "I've been working cattle drives up from Texas, but I'm looking to settle somewhere." He adjusted his grip on the wildflowers. "My ma loved it here, said these mountains had more majesty than any cathedral." She was right about that, Jane agreed, feeling a strange sense of ease with this stranger. "What kind of work are you looking for?" "Anything honest," Wade said simply. "I'm good with horses, decent with cattle, and I can mend just about anything that breaks on a ranch." They emerged from the tree line into the outskirts of Silvercreek. Jane was acutely aware that if anyone recognized her riding alongside an unknown cowboy, the gossip would spread like wildfire. "The cemetery's just past the church," she said. "I'll leave you here," Wade nodded, seeming to understand her sudden reticence. "Thank you for the company, Miss Jane." He hesitated, then carefully selected a single blue columbine from his bouquet and extended it to her. "For the pleasure of your conversation." Jane took the flower, oddly touched by the simple gesture. "Thank you, Mr. Kincaid." "Wade," he corrected with a smile, "just Wade." Jane watched him ride toward the small cemetery before turning Mercury toward home. The blue flower twirled between her fingers, more precious somehow than all the gold dust and nuggets piled on her side table. 3 days later, Jane sat in her private box at Silvercreek's newly constructed opera house, half listening to Gilbert Whitmore, a railroad magnate from Denver, describe his latest acquisition of track lines. On her other side sat Lawrence Chamberlain, a banker whose family had connections to European royalty, according to his frequent reminders. "The Denver Pacific connection will increase the value of my holdings by at least 40%, Whitmore was saying, his voice carrying despite the orchestral overture beginning below. "Which, my dear Miss Jameson, would make our combined assets quite formidable." Yes, quite," Jane murmured, her eyes scanning the crowded theater. Most of Silvercreek's respectable citizens were in attendance for the traveling company's performance of The Pirates of Penzance. Even those who couldn't afford tickets had dressed in their Sunday best to promenade outside the theater, seeing and being seen. Jane's gaze stopped abruptly when she spotted a familiar figure in the standing room section at the back of the theater. Wade Kincaid stood with his hat in his hands, his hair combed neatly and his clothes, while still humble, brushed clean. He was watching the stage with genuine interest, seemingly oblivious to the social machinations happening in the boxes around him. "Miss Jameson, are you listening?" Whitmore's irritated voice broke through her thoughts. "I beg your pardon, Mr. Whitmore. The music distracted me." Jane turned back to her companions, but found her attention repeatedly drifting to the cowboy at the back of the theater. During the intermission, Whitmore and Chamberlain went to fetch champagne. Jane remained in the box, using her fan to cool herself in the stuffy theater. She was surprised when she looked up to find Wade Kincaid standing at the entrance to her box, hat still in hand. "Evening, Miss Jane," he said with a small bow. "I thought that might be you up here." "Mr. Kincaid," she acknowledged, suddenly aware of the curious glances from neighboring boxes. "I didn't expect to see you at the opera," he smiled, unembarrassed. "My mother loved Gilbert and Sullivan. She used to sing their songs while she worked." He glanced around at the opulent surroundings, though she never saw them performed in a place like this. "Are you enjoying the performance?" "Very much." His eyes met hers directly. "Though I confess I'm not as knowledgeable about such things as your companions seem to be." So he had noticed the men flanking her. "Mr. Whitmore and Mr. Chamberlain are business associates," she said, though she knew it wasn't entirely true. "I see." Wade nodded thoughtfully. "Well, I won't keep you from your business associates. I just wanted to say hello." "Did you find work?" Jane asked impulsively as he turned to go. "Starting at the Rockingham Ranch tomorrow," he replied. "Breaking horses for old man McAllister. That's good." Jane felt an odd sense of relief knowing he would remain in the area. "McAllister has a fair reputation." Wade touched his brow in a small salute. "Enjoy the rest of the show, Miss Jane." As he walked away, Jane realized she hadn't corrected him about her name. It was pleasant, in a way, to be just Miss Jane rather than Miss Jameson, the silver heiress. "Who was that?" demanded Whitmore, returning with champagne glasses. "Just someone thanking me for a donation to the Widows and Orphans Fund," Jane lied smoothly, accepting the champagne. "You know how it is, charitable causes are always seeking patronage," Whitmore sniffed dismissively. "Common fellow shouldn't be approaching your box. There are proper channels for charity requests." Jane sipped her champagne, saying nothing. But when the performance resumed, she found herself paying more attention to the back of a certain cowboy's head than to the antics of the pirates on stage. The following week brought the Founders' Day celebration, Silvercreek's biggest annual event commemorating the town's establishment. Main Street was decorated with bunting and flags, and a large dance platform had been erected in the town square. Competitions of every sort, from shooting matches to pie baking, would occupy the day, followed by a grand ball in the evening. Jane had finally accepted Harold Pennington's escort to the festivities, largely because he had been the least presumptuous of her suitors in recent days. As they strolled among the booths and displays, Jane was uncomfortably aware of the stares and whispers that followed them. Her wealth made her a perpetual object of curiosity. "There's the shooting competition," Pennington said, guiding her toward a crowd gathered at the edge of town. "I've entered, of course. I expect to win the purse." "How exciting," Jane said without enthusiasm. She had seen enough shooting displays to last a lifetime. The competition was already underway, with contestants firing at targets set up at various distances. Jane's attention wandered until a familiar figure stepped up to the line. Wade Kincaid stood with a well-worn Winchester rifle, his stance relaxed but focused. "Who's that?" Pennington asked with a frown. "One of McAllister's new hands, I believe," Jane said casually. The targets for this round were playing cards attached to posts at 30 yards. Contestants had to hit the ace of spades. One by one, the shooters took their turns. Some missed entirely, others hit the post but not the card. Pennington hit the card but not the ace. When Wade's turn came, he raised his rifle, took aim without hurry, and fired. The center of the ace disappeared in a puff of paper fragments. "Lucky shot," muttered Pennington. The next round increased the difficulty, tin cans thrown into the air. Wade hit 3 in succession, earning appreciative murmurs from the crowd. By the final round, only Wade and 2 others remained in competition. The judge announced the last challenge, shooting the flame off a candle without touching the wick at 20 paces. One competitor missed entirely. The second grazed the candle, toppling it. Wade stepped up, took a deep breath, and squeezed the trigger. The candle's flame vanished, leaving the wick intact and still upright. The crowd erupted in cheers. Even Pennington grudgingly acknowledged it was impressive shooting. The judge handed Wade the prize purse, $20 in gold coin, and clapped him on the back. Jane watched as Wade immediately walked to a young widow with 3 small children clinging to her skirts. He pressed the purse into her hands despite her protests, then tipped his hat and walked away before she could object further. The woman's face crumpled with grateful tears as she clutched the money. "What a fool," Pennington scoffed, "giving away good money like that." "Perhaps he doesn't need it as much as she does," Jane said quietly. "Everyone needs money, Miss Jameson," Pennington replied with a knowing smile. "Some just pretend otherwise." The day progressed with more competitions and exhibitions. Jane found herself searching the crowds for glimpses of Wade, catching sight of him occasionally helping with the children's sack races or assisting an elderly man to a shaded bench. As evening approached, Jane returned to her mansion to change for the ball. Beatrice helped her into a gown of emerald silk that complemented her copper hair and fair complexion. "Half the men in town will propose to you tonight," Beatrice predicted as she fastened Jane's pearl necklace. "And all of them will mention my mines or my money in the same breath," Jane sighed, pinning a small blue wildflower to her bodice, a columbine she'd pressed between the pages of a book days earlier. "Pretty flower," Beatrice remarked. "Not quite the usual adornment for such a fine gown." "I like it better than diamonds tonight," Jane said simply. The town hall had been transformed for the ball, with crystal chandeliers brought in specially from Denver and a 12-piece orchestra from Colorado Springs. Jane's arrival with Pennington created the expected stir, and she was immediately surrounded by admirers requesting dances. She moved from partner to partner as the evening progressed, mechanically accepting compliments on her appearance while enduring thinly veiled references to business mergers and combined fortunes. During a brief respite, she stood near the punch bowl, fanning herself and wondering how soon she could politely depart. "You dance very gracefully, Miss Jameson." The voice behind her made Jane turn quickly. Wade Kincaid stood there in a clean but simple black suit that had seen better days, though his shirt was crisp and white. He looked handsome but out of place among the wealthy attendees. "Mr. Kincaid," she said, surprised. "I didn't expect to see you here." "McAllister gave all his hands the night off for the celebration," Wade explained. "I thought I might see how the other half celebrates." His eyes twinkled. "Or perhaps the other 1% might be more accurate." Jane couldn't help smiling. "Are you enjoying yourself?" "The music is fine and the company." His gaze held hers has just improved considerably. Heat rose to Jane's cheeks that had nothing to do with the crowded room. "Congratulations on your shooting victory today. That was quite impressive." "Just lucky," he demurred, "though not as lucky as Mrs. Thornton. Her husband was killed in the mine collapse last month, leaving her with those 3 little ones and no means of support." "That was very generous of you," Jane said softly. Wade shrugged. "My mother always said wealth is only worth what you do with it." He nodded toward her bodice. "You kept the flower." Jane's hand went to the dried columbine. "Yes, it reminded me of the mountains." The orchestra began a new waltz. Wade hesitated, then extended his hand. "Would you do me the honor, Miss Jameson, or should I continue calling you Miss Jane? You knew who I was." "Not at first," he admitted. "But a woman riding alone on a $1,000 thoroughbred is bound to raise questions. It didn't take much asking to learn who you were." Jane placed her hand in his. "I liked being just Jane." "You're never just anything," Wade said, leading her onto the dance floor. "But I understand the appeal of simplicity." They moved together with surprising ease. Wade was a competent dancer, though without the polished technique of her usual partners. There was something refreshing about his straightforward approach, the way his hand rested respectfully at her waist without pulling her inappropriately close. "Everyone is staring," Jane murmured, aware of the shocked looks and whispers around them. "Let them," Wade said calmly. "They'd find something to stare at regardless." As they turned across the floor, Jane caught sight of Pennington and several other suitors watching with undisguised displeasure. "My escorts won't be pleased." "Escorts, plural," Wade raised an eyebrow. "You're a popular woman." "Not me," Jane said with sudden bitterness. "My money." Wade's steps never faltered, but his expression grew serious. "That must be difficult." "It's lonely," Jane admitted, surprising herself with her candor, being seen as a prize to be won rather than a person to be known. "For what it's worth," Wade said as the music began to fade, "I'd have asked you to dance even if you were the poorest woman in Colorado." Before Jane could respond, Pennington appeared at her elbow, his face tight with controlled anger. "Miss Jameson, our next dance, I believe." Wade released her hand and stepped back with a small bow. "Thank you for the dance, Miss Jameson." As Pennington whisked her away, Jane glanced back to see Wade already moving toward the exit, his tall figure weaving between the elegantly dressed guests until he disappeared into the night. The following morning, Jane awoke to find an unusual flurry of activity in her mansion. Beatrice entered her bedroom carrying a breakfast tray, her expression troubled. "What's happening?" Jane asked, sitting up. "Visitors, miss, many visitors." Beatrice set down the tray. "All those gentlemen from last night coming to call much earlier than is proper, and they all seem quite agitated about something." Jane groaned. "The dance with Mr. Kincaid, I presume?" "That would be my guess." Beatrice poured coffee. "Mr. Pennington arrived first at 7 o'clock, if you can believe it. He's been pacing the drawing room for an hour." "Let them wait," Jane said decisively. "I'll dress and receive them when I'm ready." An hour later, Jane descended the stairs to find her drawing room filled with no fewer than 8 men, all among her most persistent suitors. They rose as she entered, their expressions ranging from concern to indignation. "Gentlemen," she said coolly, "to what do I owe this unexpected gathering?" Pennington stepped forward. "Miss Jameson, we are concerned for your reputation. Dancing with that cowhand last night has set tongues wagging all over town." "Indeed," added Whitmore from the railroad, "a woman in your position must be beyond reproach." Association with such a person raises questions. Jane seated herself calmly. "Questions about what, precisely?" "Your judgment," said Chamberlain bluntly. "The management of your affairs requires discernment about appropriate connections." "I see," Jane surveyed the room. "And you all feel qualified to determine what connections are appropriate for me." "We have your best interests at heart," Pennington insisted. "Do you?" Jane asked quietly. "Or do you have my fortune at heart?" An uncomfortable silence fell. Jane continued, "Gentlemen, I danced one waltz with a man who conducted himself with perfect propriety. He then departed without presumption. I fail to see how this threatens either my reputation or my judgment." "The man is a drifter," objected Whitmore. "A nobody without prospects or background." "And that," Jane said, rising to her feet, "is precisely why I found his company refreshing. Not once did he mention my mines, my investments, or potential business arrangements. Not once did he imply that a merger of assets would be mutually beneficial." The men exchanged glances, several shifting uncomfortably. "Miss Jameson," Pennington began, "you must understand." "I understand perfectly," Jane cut him off. "And I thank you all for making things so clear to me this morning." She moved toward the door. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have business to attend to." "What business?" demanded Chamberlain. Jane paused at the doorway. "My business, Mr. Chamberlain, which is no longer yours to question." She nodded to Beatrice, who stood nearby. "Please show the gentleman out." Later that afternoon, Jane rode alone to the Rockingham ranch, her mind made up after hours of reflection. She found Wade in the corral, working with a spirited young gelding, moving with the same easy confidence she'd noticed on their mountain ride. He looked up as she approached, surprise evident on his face. "Miss Jameson, Mr. Kincaid." Jane dismounted, tying Mercury to the hitching post. "I hope I'm not interrupting your work." Wade secured the young horse and climbed through the fence rails. "McAllister gives me some latitude with the training schedule." He studied her face. "Is everything all right? You seem troubled." "I had an illuminating morning," Jane said. "Several of my business associates expressed concern about my dancing with you last night." Wade grimaced. "I apologize if I caused you difficulty." You didn't, Jane assured him. In fact, you helped me see something important. She took a deep breath. Mr. Kincaid, Wade, would you walk with me? There's something I'd like to discuss. They strolled away from the ranch buildings toward a creek that ran along the property boundary. Wade remained silent, giving her space to gather her thoughts. I've been surrounded by suitors since my father died, Jane finally said. Men bringing gold nuggets and investment opportunities, all hoping to gain control of the Jameson fortune. She glanced at him. But you brought me a wildflower. Wade looked slightly embarrassed. It wasn't much of a gift. It was the only genuine thing I'd been offered in months, Jane countered. No ulterior motives, no expectations. They reached the creek and stood watching the water flow over smooth stones. Wade skipped a pebble across the surface. What are you saying, Miss Jameson? Jane, she corrected. And I'm saying that I'd like to know you better, Wade Kincaid, without the complications of wealth and status that seem to distort every relationship in my life. Wade turned to face her, his expression serious. I have nothing to offer someone like you, no fortune, no fancy house. Just my hands and my word. That's exactly what I want, Jane said softly. Someone who sees me, not my inheritance. People will talk. People already talk. Jane smiled. Let them. Wade reached out slowly, giving her time to withdraw, and took her hand in his. I'm just a cowboy, Jane. But if you're willing to give me a chance, I'd like to court you properly. No rushing, no presuming. Just getting to know one another as people should. I'd like that very much, Jane said, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. The next morning, Jane opened her front door to find a simple bouquet of wildflowers resting on the step. No note, no gold, no grand pronouncements, just mountain flowers gathered with care. Beatrice watched as Jane arranged them in a vase. Those from your cowboy. He's not my cowboy, Jane protested, though a smile tugged at her lips. Not yet, Beatrice observed shrewdly, but he might be if those blushes mean anything. Over the following weeks, Wade courted Jane with a patient constancy that stood in stark contrast to her previous suitor's aggressive tactics. They rode together through the mountains, Wade showing her hidden waterfalls and vistas she'd never discovered despite living there all her life. He brought her wildflowers rather than gold, stories rather than business propositions. For her part, Jane found herself relaxing in his company, laughing more freely than she had in years. She learned about his childhood in Texas, his years driving cattle up the goodnight-loving trail, his dreams of someday having a small ranch of his own. Not a big spread, he told her as they picnicked beside an alpine lake. Just enough land to run some cattle and horses, with mountains nearby and good water. It sounds perfect, Jane said, leaning back on the blanket. Simple but sufficient. That's all anyone really needs, Wade said, his gaze on the distant peaks. The trick is knowing when you have enough. The gossip in town reached fever pitch when Jane began appearing with Wade at church services and community gatherings. Her former suitors alternated between disbelief and outrage. Pennington went so far as to warn McAllister about employing that fortune-hunting cowboy, but the old rancher just laughed. Wade's the best horsebreaker I've had in 20 years, McAllister told Jane when she came to the ranch. And he turns down extra pay to send to his sister's family in Texas. Not exactly the actions of a man chasing wealth. As autumn painted the aspens gold, Jane found herself facing a decision. She had grown to care deeply for Wade, admiring his integrity and enjoying his company. But the differences in their circumstances remained a complicated reality. One crisp October afternoon, Jane invited Wade to the mansion for tea. He arrived looking uncharacteristically nervous, his hat in his hands as Beatrice showed him into the parlor where Jane waited. This is quite a home, he said, glancing at the crystal chandeliers and imported furniture. Too much, isn't it? Jane gestured for him to sit. I built it because it seemed expected, but it's never felt quite right. Wade took the offered chair. It's very impressive. But not home, Jane said with sudden certainty. Not really. They talked comfortably while sharing tea, but Jane sensed something on Wade's mind. Finally, he set down his cup with deliberate care. Jane, there's something I need to tell you, her heart stuttered. What is it? I've been offered a position, Wade said. McAllister is getting older, and his sons have no interest in ranching. He's asked me to stay on as his foreman with the understanding that I might eventually buy into the ranch as a partner." "Wade, that's wonderful," Jane exclaimed. "It's everything you've worked for." "Almost everything," he said quietly, meeting her eyes. "Jane, these past months with you have been the happiest of my life, but I need to know if there's a future for us, because I can't keep pretending there isn't a gulf between our worlds." Jane reached across and took his hand. "I've been thinking about that too. And I've made a decision," Jane said firmly. "I'm reorganizing the mining company. The board will handle day-to-day operations, with me retaining final authority but not direct management." Wade looked confused. "I don't understand. I'm simplifying my life," Jane explained. "Selling this mansion, for one thing, it's never suited me." "Jane, you don't have to change your life for me, not for you," she corrected gently. "For myself, because you helped me see what I truly want." She took a deep breath. "I've purchased land adjacent to the Rockingham, a modest parcel with good water and a view of the mountains." Wade stared at her. "You're moving next to the ranch," Jane nodded. "I'm having a proper home built there. Not a mansion, just a comfortable house where I can see the sunrise over the mountains." She squeezed his hand. "Where I could perhaps someday raise a family, if the right man were to ask me." Understanding dawned in Wade's eyes. Slowly, he moved from his chair to kneel before her, still holding her hand. "Jane Jameson, I have no gold to offer you, no grand estate or business empire, but I can offer you my heart, my hands, and my solemn promise to love you faithfully all the days of my life." He paused, emotion making his voice rough. "Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Tears welled in Jane's eyes. "Yes," she whispered. "1,000 times yes." Wade's face broke into a radiant smile as he rose and gathered her into his arms, kissing her with tender passion. Later, as they walked in the garden, Jane leaned against Wade's shoulder. "Do you know what today is?" Wade thought for a moment. "Tuesday," Jane laughed. "It's exactly 3 months since you gave me that first columbine on the mountainside." She looked up at him. The wealthy woman surrounded by suitors with gold, won by the cowboy who brought flowers. "And saw the woman behind the fortune," Wade added, kissing her forehead. "That's the greatest gift of all," Jane said softly, "being truly seen." A year later, Jane stood on the porch of their new home, watching Wade return from the corrals. The modest but beautiful house sat on a rise overlooking both the mountains and the expanded Rockingham, which now operated as a partnership between Wade and old McAllister. Jane's simplified business arrangements left her time for the things she truly valued: her husband, their home, and the community projects she supported with both time and money. Wade climbed the steps and wrapped his arms around her, his hands gently resting on the slight swell of her belly where their first child grew. "Happy?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. Jane leaned into his embrace, watching the sun set behind the mountains they both loved. "Completely," she answered, knowing it was true. The wealth that had once isolated her now served a greater purpose, and the heart that had once been lonely was filled with love. As twilight settled over their mountain home, Wade pressed a small bouquet of late-blooming wildflowers into her hand. Jane accepted them with the same joy as the very first flower he had given her, the simple gift that had changed her life.